Hey guys, welcome in. And today we're going to be talking about our next topic in our Period 5 unit, which is going to be dealing with the growing tension of sectionalism. And we've kind of mentioned this very briefly a little bit in our last topic as we talked about kind of the westward expansion as the United States continued their manifest destiny all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And there's a growing problem that every time a new territory is added or a new state is added, will this territory or state be free or be a slave state or territory? And this growing rise of conflict over the issue of slavery has created a true sectionalism or a true strife between the North and the South. So today we're going to kind of see how does that strife grow and really kind of push ourselves all the way until a civil war. So real quick on your own, I want you to think about these two questions and looking at these two maps here. The first being, what major changes took place from 1820 to 1850? Think back to the last couple lessons that we've talked about. And then, in your opinions, were these changes good or bad for the United States? And explain why. So go ahead, pause those videos, and then go ahead and hit play when you're ready. So hopefully there, when you looked at those maps, you kind of saw that there was a growing expansion, that manifest destiny was created, and it became a problem as to whether states should be free or slave. And with California being admitted in the Compromise of 1850, the power shifted in the House and the Senate more towards the North, or at least the free states. And the South had a growing resentment to this. And they had this fear that slavery and their way of life was going to be vastly changed. Because if you remember back to what we talked about with Henry Clay's American System, there were two distinctly different types of culture in the North and the South. The North heavily relied on manufacturing. They have more of an economic industrial power, while the South was a lot more based on agriculture, especially cash croppery, things like cotton, things like tobacco, things like rice. So these areas obviously have two vastly different cultures that is also kind of playing into this sectionalism or this differing between the North and the South. And because of these regional differences, we really do tend to see a vast gap in the way of life, or even just getting along between the two different regions. But for the most part, between 1820 to 1850, as we're moving out westward and manifest destiny is more of the issue, and we have a war with Mexico, and we're adding territory from the Native Americans and also Mexico. Most of the sectionalism was able to kind of be resolved very slowly and swiftly by compromises, whether it was the Compromise of 1820, Compromise of 1850. Henry Clay's ideas are able to kind of keep the Union intact. And again, just to kind of recap with that Missouri Compromise of 1820, we talked about how both sides, either the North or the South, did not want each, or the other side, I'm sorry, to have a majority or a population boost in the Congress. The Northerners did not want slavery to spread among the Deep South, and the Southerners believed that the North was trying to take away their right to slavery, or their right to way of life. So again, Henry Clay is going to negotiate this compromise, and where Missouri will become a free state, Missouri will become a slave state, Maine will become a free state, and all slavery will be outlawed except for in Missouri above this line, this 36 parallel line. So in the future, there would be no slavery here in the Nebraska-Kansas territory, or in the Oregon country, or in New Spain as it starts to be added. However, we did talk about how slavery was not the only issue separating the two sides. It was also this idea of economics and tariffs. And we talked about how tariffs are really kind of a tax on imported goods. And during the Jacksonian presidency, this tariff that was put on brought in goods was making it more expensive in the South, but was also trying to benefit the industry of the North. And it got to be the point where the South, especially led by South Carolina and Vice President John C. Calhoun, they wanted to secede. They wanted to leave because they did not believe that they had, or the federal government had the right to put taxes or tariffs on products that they did not want. And they wanted to nullify that tariff. They did not want to have to enforce it. So after John C. Calhoun tries to nullify and tries to secede, President Jackson has to swiftly come in and threaten him and basically say, you do not have the right to secede. We will use military force if needed to make sure that you follow this tariff and do not secede from the Union. There's also a growing rise of tension in the southern states after the Nate Turner Rebellion, which kind of led to a harsher treatment of slaves in the South, much similar to what we saw with the Stono Rebellion. So then you have the South who is trying to defend their idea of slavery even more, while you have the abolitionists of the North who are definitely then trying to show the improperness of slavery and the harshness and the brutality that slavery created. And remember, sectionalism will continue to be pushed in American culture over this issue of slavery in the West. So as we continue to expand, whether it's from the Texas annexation, the Mexican cessions, California and the Oregon Country and so forth, as we achieve our manifest destiny, there is a growing need to figure out what are we going to do with these territories or these new states as they're being admitted. Are they going to be slave or are they going to be free? Remember that Northern congressmen tried to pass the Wilmot Proviso, which would have outlawed all slaves or all slavery from all territories here in the blue section during the Mexican cessions, so present day California, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. However, they were starting to kind of vote more by region, not so much by party. So you had more of a northern party and a southern party rather than a Republican, or I'm sorry, a Whig and a Democrat party. And you then start to see a new party being created, that Free Soil Party, which will eventually become the Republican Party, which is typically or really kind of only created to stop the expansion of slavery and to eventually create as an abolition movement to end slavery altogether. So then we get to the last great compromise of Henry Clay, and we're talking about 1850. And we mentioned this already before, that California will be asked to become a free state. Well, the Southerners did not want more free states, and they wanted to be allowed to keep Southwest territories open to slavery. So we're going to have an issue where how are we going to make this work where we have more more free states than we have slave states? And one of the things that Henry Clay is going to push for is some sort of resolve where the North and South can at least coexist, and where the South does not feel threatened that the slavery is going to be taken away from them, and the North does not feel like slavery is going to continue to be expanded to where the South has too much power over the North. So with this will come the Compromise of 1850, and this again will be Henry Clay's final great compromise, where California will be entered as a free state. However, the people of Utah and New Mexico could vote using that popular sovereignty idea, could allow to either ban or allow slavery to exist. The slave trade will end in Washington, D.C. And then also, the fugitive slave law will basically be created so that way Southerners could recapture slaves in the North. So let's say that via the Underground Railroad, a slave had escaped from Georgia all the way to New York. The federal government had the power then, if they were able to capture or find this slave, would able to return them back to Georgia. So just by crossing that Mason-Dixon line did not necessarily grant them freedom anymore. And also, families that were found to be helping runaway slaves could also be fined or imprisoned for their aiding of a slave and criminal. So if we wanted to kind of recap the differences between sectionalism from this time period of 1820 to 1850, we would say that it definitely increased because of regional economies or economic differences, where you have the South, who is primarily dedicated to agriculture with the use of slavery to keep prices low. You also have the North, who is increasing in industry, who is using tariffs to benefit their industry, which is making problems more for the South. And this friction of the issue of slavery is going to be causing all sorts of strife between the two. Also, as far as westward expansion, anytime that you have a new territory or state added to the Union, both sides are going to want them to be claimed to their own side to protect their majority in Congress. So as states like California, Texas are being annexed or being added, you have each side trying to balance the power in Congress. And lastly, you have this growing abolitionist movement with the Free Soil Party eventually leading to the Republican Party. The people overwhelmingly in the North are turning against slavery and trying to basically outlaw it. Originally just in the westward, but also eventually when we get to the Civil War, eventually trying to outlaw it altogether with the Emancipation Proclamation. So guys, come on in with some questions tomorrow. We'll continue to talk about how sectionalism is dividing the country, and we'll get into how it eventually will lead to a civil war.